it's easy sometimes to feel like you're powerless, like when you come out in the streets and you march and you yell and nobody hears you. But I'm here to tell you today, you are powerful. You can stop this bill.
A co-founder of the social news and entertainment website Reddit has been found dead.
Aaron learned how to learn at a very young age.
Bob introduced him to computers, and he just took off.
He certainly was a prodigy, although he never kind of thought of himself like that.
He really had different aspirations for the purposes of political goals.
He was sort of learning to hack politics.
Stop SOPA!
This bill poses a serious threat for all who use the internet.
The freedoms our country had been built on would be suddenly deleted. I couldn't let that happen.
Aaron was trying to make the world work. He was trying to fix it.
Bringing public access to the public domain.
He doesn't hack JSTOR in the traditional sense of hacking.
He wasn't stealing, he was making a point.
They arrested him, strip searched him, and left him in solitary confinement.
He said, they want to make an example out of me.
On the internet, everybody has a license to speak. It's a question of who gets heard.
Aaron Swartz was not a criminal.
You can say, oh, this is another instance of cyber war. The cyber criminals are attacking us again. They use those as excuses to push through more and more dangerous laws.
This is a poor use of prosecutorial discretion.
Should have never gotten the attention of the criminal system.
We need to galvanize opposition today because today is when it matters.
I'm still angry. This is what we as a people think is okay.
Aaron was willing to put himself at risk for the causes that he believed in.
He was the internet's own boy, and the old world killed him.
Brian, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So we just watched the trailer for your film, The Internet's Own Boy. It's about Aaron Swartz. And in a way, basically any movie about Aaron Swartz is about the internet. He's such an integral part of a lot of things that we come to think of as being the modern web. And we'll talk to that in a little bit, but you actually turned to the internet to fund a portion of this film, yes?
Yeah, we started. Well, I started making this film about a week after Aaron died. I was on my previous film was called We Are Legion: The Story of the Hacktivists, and I was on a panel talking about hackers and hacktivism with Quinn Norton, who's in the film, and it was an ex-girlfriend of Aaron's, and it was a very sort of sad kind of event. Everybody on the panel knew him, people in the audience knew him, so I immediately started filming reactions. It was at the very beginning of this wave of like anger and frustration that was kind of bubbling through the internet, and people were writing about him. So, including people that had never met him or even knew his story, it really resonated with a lot of people. So I started filming right away and trying to understand what the story was, and I wasn't sure I was making a film right away. And I had a conversation with Aaron's father, Robert. It was very moving to me about his son, and I realized I was going to make a full-length documentary. And the first thing we did, actually, is I took some of the footage that I'd already shot, and we did a Kickstarter campaign. It's the first time I'd ever done that, and it got us going. I think it's rare for a film to raise all of their money on Kickstarter, but it certainly got us moving.
You did raise a pretty significant portion of it, though, yeah? So, I mean, how was that experience for you, though? I mean, the Kickstarter experience in general and the crowdfunding thing.
Well, yeah, it was my first Kickstarter campaign, and it was more work than I thought it was going to be. I think that's true if you talk to anybody who's done a Kickstarter campaign. I mean, I think that the money that you raise is really the kind of the secondary kind of most important part. I mean, really, you have this all the people that come to support you create this kind of community that it just becomes this kind of built-in group of people that are so excited and so interested and invested in the film. I mean, I think that community is actually the strongest part of it.
And this is a subject that already had a pretty big built-in audience, and this just kind of helped get them more invested in it, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of things written about Aaron right after he died. My opinion was that even though some of them were good, they were all kind of small little glimpses. You know, there wasn't a sense of the kind of epic story of that this kind of remarkable person had done, his early innovation all the way up through the 2-year legal nightmare that he went through, and ultimately this kind of tragic personal story. But what his story meant to the early internet, and to and how it pointed to really sort of systemic problems in our criminal justice system and outdated computer laws. I don't think the full arc of it had been told, so that's kind of one of the impetus of one of the points of making the film.
And so you said it was this conversation that you had with his father and this panel and everybody's reaction shortly after he died that led you to make this film. But when did you become first aware of him? When did you start following his story?
Well, I started following Aaron's story I remember when he was arrested, the first day he was arrested. Mostly I think that's because I was making another film, We Are Legion, the story of the hacktivist, and a good amount of my work has had to do with hackers and technology and this kind of relationship between technology and culture. But it was striking to me. His story really stood out, but it was also it wasn't getting the same attention that a lot of other kind of hacker stories were getting. You know, it was really quiet. I was surprised actually nobody was really following his story for this entire 2-year kind of legal nightmare that he was involved with. And in fact, his lawyer kind of said the same thing. He's like, yeah, we would go to the courthouse. There'd be like one person there from like the Harvard newspaper, and that's it. And then after he died, there was this incredible wave of kind of anger and frustration. And I realized making the documentary that during that 2-year period, Aaron was actively trying to keep quiet about the case. He didn't want to tell his friends what he was going through. He didn't want to implicate them in this kind of legal troubles, potentially expose them to this prosecutor. He didn't want to anger the prosecutor by being too kind of vocal about it. There's one point that we talk about in the film where he releases a press release through Demand Progress, a group that he co-founded, that basically talks about the case. If you look at this press release, this is a couple of paragraphs maybe, it's a really short thing. And the prosecutors later told an MIT report that had been done about this whole incident that this was a wild internet campaign, right? That Aaron was starting a wild internet campaign. And having made films about anonymous and hacktivists, and like, I've seen some wild internet campaigns, right? This was not a wild internet campaign. So we kind of look at that in the film and how there was a real backlash anytime Aaron tried to talk about it. So during that period, he was quiet about it, which of course is the kind of that isolation is the worst thing that you can experience if you're having any sort of issues with depression or any sort of personal issues.
And you know that speaks to a certain amount of selflessness that he seemed to have had when, or at least that his friends and family, you know, portray him as having, and this very sort of principled nature to the stances that he took. Is that really what people have connected with him? I mean, because even people who didn't know him personally seem to have a lot of an emotional attachment to him as a figure. Is that one of the things that you think?
Yeah, it was really striking to me, actually, that most people had not, in those kind of early internet working groups that created RSS, in which he was a significant contributor at age 13 or 14. He was a technical architect for Creative Commons, one of the co-founders of Reddit. He was in those circles a kind of quasi-celebrity, right? But beyond that, most people didn't really know who he was, and yet there was a lot of response to his death, a lot of sympathy after he died, and a lot of anger. And so that's part of what I was exploring in the film. It's like, well, why do so many people, why does his story resonate with so many people? And I think that's partly because, the sale of Reddit to Condé Nast made him a very rich 19-year-old. And what he did after that was really turn his back on Silicon Valley culture, right? There's this, still traditional sort of Silicon Valley startup culture is sell it and then just do it again, right? Build to flip, create something, get it sold to Google or whatever, or AOL, I guess, and then start, and then start over and just continue on this treadmill. Well, what he did was he sort of took a turn towards social justice issues, towards using his prodigious skills to in the public good. And I think that's what people resonate. I mean, there's a sense that in Silicon Valley, there's like everybody says like we want to make the world a better place, right? I mean, this is becoming a cliche. And I think Aaron looked at that and he said, well, do you know what makes the world bad right now? Do you know what's wrong with the world? And if so, can you think of something that targets that thing that you think is wrong? And then can you measure the effect that action has had on the thing that you think is wrong, so that you can alter it and tweak it for later approaches, right? The minute you're that intellectually curious about actually changing the world, you've ripped the veil from the Silicon Valley cliche, and you're moving into an area that I think is very different. So he turns his back on that, moves back to Cambridge basically, and he gets into politics.
He doesn't just turn his back; he actively gets himself fired, basically, correct?
Yeah, I think he gets him, yeah, he does. I mean, it never sat well with him. There's these blog posts that he writes where he just says he's like, he can't take it. Like, he can't take any more video game reviews or somebody coming up to him and saying, try out this new gadget. Like, he can't, it doesn't sit with him. It doesn't square with his notion of what he wants to do in life.
And so I guess then he takes his money, he takes his skills and his relatively high profile now that he's got all of these accomplishments under his belt, which is, stunning for somebody that young and makes you feel like you have done nothing with your life when you look at him. And he looked for inspiration to Tim Berners-Lee and other early pioneers and put his efforts into hacktivism, and he got this is sort of where he starts getting himself in trouble, though. Yes.
Yeah, although he does a lot of things like Open Library Project, and he does a website called Watchdog.net, which these kind of ways of looking at politics and attempts to sort of connect people with their representatives in ways using the internet, things like that. Really, actually innovative, pretty interesting, innovative stuff. The first time he runs afoul of the law is with an incident called PACER incident, right? PACER is public access to court electronic records. So, reporters use this, lawyers use this, and essentially it's all the documents that are created by our court system, right? These are obviously created with taxpayer money by government employees, and they are essentially the record of how our laws are being used in the courts, right? Which is important. It's not the letter of the law; it's the practice of the law, and you kind of need to know that if you're an American citizen, right? So, I use PACER. It's this awful system. It's 10 cents a page. It's terribly sort of the code is awful. It's hard to use. It's hard to find the documents you want. It's just an awful site, and so Aaron and others were upset that PACER was making money per page off of these taxpayer-funded, created documents, and there was a kind of movement to try to liberate those documents. The idea being that we should make the law public. So he, along with Carl Malamud and others, basically take advantage of a nationwide library program that has free access to the PACER documents. And he ends up downloading 20 million pages of text and posting them online. This turns out to be completely legal, but it definitely gets the attention of the FBI, who stakes out his parents' house in Illinois and tries to contact him, lure him down to a coffee shop without a lawyer, things like that. So we go through that incident in the film. Ultimately, all the charges, there was no charges brought against him. FBI drops the case entirely, but it was certainly the first time where he kind of brushes up against the law.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, sort of a precursor to what ultimately does get him charged, yes, at MIT. Can you tell us a little bit about that incident there?
Yeah, so it's similar in some ways and different. It's interesting, the comparison. The main thing that gets him in trouble is that he goes to, is downloading articles from the online service JSTOR. Right? JSTOR is a collection of academic journal articles, research that's presumably created by taxpayer-funded instructors and researchers. Some of it's in the public domain. It's a whole collection of documents. It's a real rich collection of human knowledge, really. But it's locked up behind a paywall. Sometimes you can pay $50, $60, $70 a pop for these articles, right? If you're doing anything serious, you can spend a lot of money on this stuff. And the idea is that why should this stuff be so expensive? Why should it be behind a paywall? Researchers often just have to give up their copyright to these organizations who basically take their work, scrape the cream off the top. Researcher doesn't get any compensation for it. They often don't get cited because it's hard. You know, people doing research would rather just Google stuff and not use their work. So it's a problem for everybody. The universities that hire the researchers then have to subscribe to these services and spend more money. So they make tons and tons of money off of this. This is offensive to people in the academic community. So Aaron, we don't know why he does this, right? He never does anything with these documents. But what he does is he goes onto the MIT campus, which has this famously fast and open network, and he connects from MIT, he connects to JSTOR. You can do this. You don't have to be an MIT student to do this. So, and he ends up downloading 4.7 million academic journal articles. So he is arrested before he does anything with these articles, and this begins the 2-year legal nightmare about how bad was what he did, what was he actually going to do with these, which we don't know. We speculate about things in the film, but that begins his legal troubles. His serious legal troubles.
Yeah, and then, what exactly is he charged with? What's the law that he's charged under? There's a 4-count indictment, which is later increased with this kind of pressure that he's getting from this prosecutor, increased to 13. There's a superseding indictment. Almost all of his charges involve access to whether or not he has authorized access to this database, which presumably he does because you don't have to be an MIT student to be on the MIT network, and MIT network has free access to JSTOR. So that sort of path of how he got that, he was authorized to do that. Now, clearly they didn't mean for him to download 4.7 million journal articles. So at some point, he breaks the law. So they're basically it's a situation where they're trying to figure out what laws did he break, and the main law is that is used against him. 11 out of the 13 charges are a law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is a whole part of the. Yeah, and that's ultimately they're looking to charge him, hand him a pretty stiff sentence after all of the offers for a plea bargain. It was 35 years, I believe?
Well, that was the first 4-count indictment, which again was increased later, but the first 4-count indictment, they released a press release that said 35 years in prison and a $1 million fine.
Which sounds pretty intense for downloading a series of academic journals. I mean, a lot of academic journals.
Yeah.
But still, downloading academic journals sounds like a pretty... So do you think he was targeted by the government for any specific reasons? I'm sure there are plenty of other people out there that, the FBI could have gone after, but they chose to make an example of him.
Tons of people the FBI could have gone after, including, by the way, people in the financial meltdown. The cause of financial, presumably, this is that same period. They spent a lot of resources going after this young kid. Yeah, I mean, was he a target? I think, one key thing is that the lead prosecutor in this case, Stephen Hyman, told Aaron's dad that they wanted to make an example out of Aaron, that they needed a case for deterrence. So the immediate question is, what kind of behavior were they trying to deter? It's confusing, actually, because if you look at the broad kind of activity that Aaron was involved in, most of it involved political organizing, sort of grassroots political organizing, social justice issues. And he's somebody that I would argue very much works within the system, right? I made We Are Legion, the story of the hacktivists, You know, I've met a lot of people that are just frustrated with the system and are just done with it, like think we should just burn it and start over. Aaron was definitely not that person. Definitely, he sort of believed that like you could hack the system in the best possible sense. You could make it work better. Taking sort of social systems, political systems, looking for ways to improve them, very much within the law. I mean, I think that's a defining characteristic of his actions. So, it remains an open question. Why was this the guy they had to make an example out of? And I think part of it has to do with, just has to do with the fact that our laws are so kind of outdated compared to where we are and what kind of activity this is.
And that actually brings me to one of the things that I actually think is most impressive is in the midst of all this, Aaron is very much leading the charge against PIPA and SOPA in the public eye and fighting against these sorts of laws that you're talking about, like in a very public way.
Yeah, it is striking. I mean, he's going through some really difficult times himself. This is a 2-year, seriously awful period of time for him, these kind of legal troubles that he gets into. But he's kind of undeterred by, you know, he continues this kind of political organizing and really is at the beginning of this battle against SOPA, you know, the Stop Online Piracy Act, which was so incredibly effective in sort of, you know, stopping that from going into effect. So, you know, he's undeterred by that and continues to kind of press on using his skills to kind of get people motivated.
All right. I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience, if anybody has any. There is a microphone, I believe, going around somewhere.
I guess, yeah, just 2 quick questions. One, this is a community that seems to sort of, when you punish them, they even respond even stronger. Are there any good sort of stories of retribution against the government hacking sort of in his name after the fact? And 2, where and when can we see this movie?
Okay. So everybody heard the question, right? Yeah, there was quite a big backlash after Aaron died. Lots of protests and lots of protests happening online. There was petitions to try to get Stephen Hyman and the prosecutor in this case and his boss Carmen Ortiz out of office. Those didn't go anywhere ultimately. They're still. I mean, I think that their sort of political hopes have been dashed. I think they're, you know, they didn't emerge unscathed from this, but they're still in the positions that they were in. Lots of broader hacker activity, defacing of sites, denial of service attacks against various people, MIT websites, also I think denial of service attacks against government websites, if I'm not mistaken. But the film is coming out June 27th, so like a week and a half. It's going to be in theaters, 25 theaters across the country, and it's going to be video on demand too. You can buy the film if you want to support us filmmakers, things like iTunes and other things. But there's also going to be a Vimeo version that has a Creative Commons element. Aaron was a Creative Commons, was technical architect of Creative Commons. So we're also releasing it through Vimeo in a non-commercial share-alike license. And some of those, the proceeds that we make are going to go to a charity that Aaron.
On that point, do you worry about hackers downloading your movie illegally? Since it does sort of skew towards that. Are you worried about downloading of the movie illegally?
No, it's going to happen. And I don't, yeah. I mean, We Are Legion was one of the most pirated films of the year that it came out. It's not surprising, but I mean, the part 1 of the Creative Commons license is saying it's okay to share it. So it's, I mean, it's a non-commercial use of it, but you know, we were very, it was important to me. And we got, you know, we were premiered at Sundance, and we got big offers and stuff from traditional sources, but it was important for me to have something that was in line with the principles of Aaron, and not to get into what would be obviously an absurd situation where a studio or something would have license to the film and then be prosecuting somebody from downloading. I mean, it was like avoid this crazy scenario at all costs. Plus, I think it's okay to, you know, like, I have a more liberal view of that than many people in the business do. Let's keep it there.
How do you guys feel about So you mentioned JSTOR and MIT. You mentioned JSTOR and MIT getting their sights defaced and just them in this story. What do you think of their role? Because at the end of the day, it was the prosecutors who pushed these charges against them. And I mean, MIT is a school, and JSTOR, whether they charge or not, they're like a scholarly institution that is aiming for the betterment. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, JSTOR is aiming for the betterment. Yeah, JSTOR is not the worst offender in this, in a really messed up system, I think, that we have with regard to academic research. I mean, it is broken, and JSTOR is not the worst offender. I mean, someone like Reed Elsevier is way worse. Ooh. And, but JSTOR is the one he chose to kind of go after. What do I think of, government, JSTOR, and MIT? It's interesting, these different kinds of reactions. I mean, JSTOR, it's notable that JSTOR dropped all charges against Aaron. So JSTOR is presumably the quote-unquote victim in this crime. Although Aaron never did anything with those documents. He didn't post them online. He didn't do what a lot of his friends thought he might be doing, which is analyze them for corruption, analyze academic research for corruption, funding, specifically in the area of climate change. But JSTOR, relatively early on, I don't think they were friends with Aaron or the defense, but they basically said, look, we don't really see the crime here. We don't want to be a part of this. We don't see the point in pursuing this kid for what he did to us. And they back out in a pretty early stage. What's curious is that the government doesn't skip a beat at that point. They continue. And in fact, they keep ratcheting it up. And MIT, in a report, say they remained neutral. But the neutrality really helped the prosecutors. It didn't help the defense. And there were things that they just didn't give the defense, which they should have. So MIT's role is really curious. I mean, I think they really dropped the ball on this. And I think that compared to what the kinds of things that they think of themselves, you know, MIT thinks of themselves as a place where technologists can kind of push the boundaries and break the rules a little bit. I mean, this is how this is their identity, and they really kind of their behavior here was really failed in that regard. I think there's a lot of soul searching going on there right now.
All right, so I think that's all the time we have. Thank you for coming. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, of course.
You want to plug your movie one more time?
Yeah, The Internet's Own Boy. Yeah.
It's 27th?
The
Yes?
27th, yeah.
Thank you so much.
The Galaxy S5 is the Android Wear app. This is the application that's downloaded from the Google Play Store to connect to the Gear Live.